We're going to keep it going with this Curious George. Today is his first day of school. This is George. He was a good little monkey and always very curious. Today George was so excited he could barely eat his breakfast. "You have a big day ahead of you, George," said his friend, the man in the yellow hat. It was a big day for George. It was the first day of school, and he had been invited to be a special helper. George and his friend walked together to the schoolyard. Some of the children were nervous, but George could not wait for the fun to begin. He's walking into the school. In the classroom, George's friends introduced him to Mr. Apple. "Thank you for inviting George to school today," the man with the yellow hat said to the teacher. Then he waved goodbye. "Have a good day, George. I'll be back to pick you up after school." Look at that. Remember we talked a lot about kindergarten? I think that's where George might be going. The children were excited to have a monkey in class. "George is going to be our special helper," Mr. Apple told them. And what a helper he was. At story time, George held the book. And at math time, children could count on George. There, he's holding the book with his hands and feet. And they're counting all his fingers and toes. At recess, George made sure everyone had a ball and a well-balanced snack. After lunch, Mr. Apple got out paints and brushes. George saw red, yellow, and blue paint. 3 colors were not very many, George said. George was curious. Could he make more colors? I think you know how to make more colors. First, George mixed red and blue to make, what does red and blue make? Purple. Next, George mixed red and yellow. What do red and yellow make? Orange. Then George mixed yellow and blue to make green. Finally, George mixed all of the colors to make... What happens if you mix all the colors? Ooh, a big mess. The children thought the mess was funny, but Mr. Apple did not. "Oh dear," he said, "we're going to need something to clean this up. Everyone, please sit quietly while I look." Whoops. What happened? George did not mean to make such a mess, and he certainly did not want to sit quietly. He wanted to help. It was his job, after all. George had an idea. In the hallway, George found a closet. In the closet, he found a bucket. In the bucket, he found just what he needed. What do you think he needs? How's he going to clean that mess up? A mop! George was on his way back to the classroom when he heard someone yell, "Stop! Stop! Where are you going with my mop?" The janitor ran after George. "Stop! Stop! No running in the halls!" The principal ran after the janitor. But George was going too fast to stop. He grabbed the doorway and swung inside. He needs to clean this mess up. Splosh! The bucket tipped, the mop dropped, and George slid across the floor. Now the mess was even bigger. Mr. Apple looked surprised. The principal frowned, and the janitor just shook his head. And George, poor George, he felt terrible. Maybe he was not such a good helper after all. So sad. The children felt terrible too. They did not like to see George looking so sad. They thought he was a great helper. Now they wanted to help him. Oh, look what they're doing. So the children all lent a hand and some feet. You see, they're using hands and feet to sponge it up. And before anyone knew it, the mess was gone. "That little monkey sure is helpful," said the janitor. "It looks like Mr. Apple has a whole class full of helpers." At the end of the day, when George's friends arrived to pick him up, Mr. Apple said, "Thank you for all of your help, George. We hope you will come help us again." The children cheered, and they hoped George would come again, too. Oh, look, they're lifting him up. Woo! Thanks, George. George waved goodbye to his new friends. What a great day it had been. He could not wait to come back to school. How fun.